The 2023 Pro Farmer Crop Tour is presented by Pioneer. Pioneer combines cutting-edge research with one of the largest local testing programs in the industry to help farmers succeed. Pioneer, what's next happens here. And by BASF, helping you do the biggest job on earth. The international sponsor for Crop Tour is the U.S. Soybean Export Council. Crop Tour 2023 is also supported by Ag Leader, by Brandt, by Champion Seed, by Farm Credit Services of America, by Growmark, by Meristem Crop Performance, by the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council, by Nutrien, by Pattern Ag, by RCIS, and by the United Soybean Board.
Hello and welcome to Crop Tour Live. I'm Clinton Griffiths and we're excited tonight to bring you results from day one of the Pro Farmer Crop Tour. Now the eastern leg of the tour today, starting out in Ohio and ending there in Indiana. Out in the west, the day began for scouts in South Dakota, ending up in Nebraska. Scouts and other tour fans gathering in the east in Noblesville, Indiana and in Grand Island, Nebraska tonight, now awaiting the numbers, wanting to know the average yield for corn and soybeans expected in Ohio and South Dakota, which we're about to reveal here in just a few moments. But before we do, let's bring in our tour leaders. In the east, as always, Pro Farmer editor Brian Grady, and in the west, the host of AgriTalk, Chip Flory. All right, guys, looks like we're right there up against the 8 o'clock window. Let's go ahead and get started. Brian, we'll start with you out in Ohio.
Count in a 3x3 square, 1252.93.
All right, hey, repeat those one more time. We lost your mic for just a second. Let's give it one more go. Make sure everybody got that. We'll start with soybeans again.
Soybeans 1252.93, corn 183.94.
Okay, and Chip, out to South Dakota for us.
Get that. That is up 32.9% from a year ago. And on soybeans, the pod count in a 3x3 foot square.
Yep, go ahead, Chip.
1,013, up 16.2 from a year ago.
All right, repeat your corn number for us one more time there in South Dakota. We're getting all the kinks worked out here on Pro Farmer Live. I know.
Okay.
The first night of the tour. Luckily, we don't have any fireworks tonight. Let's give it a shot.
157.42. That is up 32.9% from a year ago. Heck of a recovery in the state of South Dakota.
You know, I think we'll start off with looking at both of these slates of numbers and really kicking off in a couple of states that I think all indications were that they were going to be pretty strong compared to last year. Brian, why don't you start with there in Ohio, kind of what these numbers tell us. Let's talk through it. Chip, feel free to chime in there and ask questions of Brian and what he saw today.
Well, in Ohio, USDA has, I think, the second highest corn yield on record in their August estimate. And we were up 5.6% from a year ago. The record is 2021 in the state at 193. USDA put it at 191 in August. And so, can it live up to those expectations? I don't think it's quite as good as what it was 2 years ago. It was a very uniform crop that year in the state. Not as uniform this year, more ups and downs, but boy, there's a lot of ups, I'll tell you that, with that number that we just released. The soybeans, up 10.7% from what we found pod counts in a 3x3 square last year. And there's a lot of pods out there. There aren't many flowers. What's there is there and has to, plants have to support it at this point in time. But boy, there's pods out there. Now they need to finish out. The pods that are there are generally flat though, and so going to need some time. Going to need some additional rains. Soil moisture conditions are good in some of these areas, but we're still going to need time and rains to finish them off.
As we look at those numbers, Chip, does anything stand out to you looking at either corn or soybeans there in Ohio, going through that? Some of the things, for me was, we talk a lot about soybeans, but it seems like we're setting ourselves up for a pretty decent year there in Ohio.
Yeah,
especially if we can
certainly
finish.
looked like that. Brian, one thing I'm interested about is the maturity on that corn crop. Is there time for that crop to gain some weight and realize the potential of 184, 185 bushels?
Yeah, so the maturity, we measured on my route anything from blister stage to early dough. We didn't have anything that was dented. We did talk to a couple scouts a little bit ago that mentioned a little bit more mature crops, but in general, the maturity kind of lacks. And so offers up two things on that front. First, if it has the time, it can add some bushels potentially. If it doesn't get the rains and doesn't have the time, then it can take some away. So that can go either direction.
Chip, as we look at what's going on out in South Dakota, talk us through the numbers. Brian, feel free to jump in here and see if there's any questions that you have. Chip, as we get another look at those, we talk about a recovery in South Dakota, especially in that southeastern quadrant of the state, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Go back to 2022. The area north of the tour area, so part of South Dakota that we were not in, was the best yielding part of the state. This year, it may not be the best yielding part of the state, but it's not going to do a whole lot to hurt the state average yield in South Dakota this year as well. So if we're getting help from the northern part of the state, and the southern part of the state is a whole lot better. A third of a yield better than what it was a year ago, up 33%. So it's an impressive recovery. We didn't talk about disease in the corn crop. We didn't talk about a whole lot of issues with the crop when we were doing the route reports here just a little bit ago. And I think as long as we don't fry this crop or broil this crop here this week, because I think we only pulled 6 irrigated samples out of South Dakota. And there's some issues with being able to continue to irrigate the crop in Nebraska too that I'm sure we will have to talk about tomorrow. But the South Dakota crop, if it can survive this week with the hot temperatures and the breeze blowing and low humidity without burning up, then I think it's got a chance. Maturity-wise, South Dakota crop, I think, is far enough along. Some rain isn't going to hurt the crop at this time. I don't know how much it's really going to help it. I'm sure that it would add some weight, but I don't know if it's going to, add 10 bushels per acre or something like that. So,
yeah.
But it's a crop that's got a very good potential up in South Dakota. Soybeans, that pod count, 1,013, is a nice recovery from a year ago as well. And as long as, as long as we don't burn it up here this week, I think that bean crop will be all right. 1,013 isn't the big numbers that Brian saw over on the eastern leg of the tour in Ohio, but it's big enough to build a respectable bean crop in South Dakota.
Brian, any questions on your end of what Chip saw today?
Yeah, Chip, we knew year over year it was going to be up big in South Dakota. So take last year out of the equation. How's this stack up? Is it average crop? Is it above average crop? Both corn and soybeans.
Yeah, we came in, I've got the number right here. I need to get it a little closer. 5.1% above the 3-year average on that corn yield. So that 3-year average, of course, includes last year, but right. It seems like a pretty average crop to me. And I know that people hate hearing that, but I just didn't. I wasn't wowed by the numbers when we wrapped them up here today on the corn crop. Even the total number of ears around came in at 16.21 or 20, I guess, 16.2 on the kernel rows around the ear. We were a little concerned that because of some stress early in the season that we might lose some of that kernel row, but it seems like it came in just fine.
What about potential on these beans? Any potential to continue to fill out, add pods? Where are we at as far as maturity goes?
Yeah, we're not going to add a whole lot of pods. There's a few late planted beans that might add a few pods, but it's not going to be much at all. There are some disease issues, and I'm not exactly sure what it was. If we're looking at some kind of a stem borer, or if we're looking at some Phytophthora or white mold, even out in the Western Corn Belt. There were reports of that tonight here at the meeting in Grand Island. So whatever it is, you don't really notice it that much when you're getting into the field, and then you pull back the canopy, you take a look in there, and all of a sudden you see that there's a dead plant. You start looking around, and yeah, okay, there's a few dead plants spotted out there. It's not devastating by any stretch, but it might be knocking the top end off of some of that soybean yield.
Guys, our cameras have been following scouts around all day, trying to get a better idea of what they're seeing. Let's start out east today and in central Ohio fields where scouts reported, some deep green soybean plants, low weed pressure, pretty good pod counts. Scouts say the crop appears more consistent than last year. Soil moisture is better. Farmers that we spoke with say that rains have been good as of late, but the crop had a pretty dry start to the growing season, especially in early May and into June. We spoke with Josh Yoder, who farms out in that area.
I think overall, it's going to be a better crop than we had last year. In particular, I don't know if it's going to be as good of a crop as what we had in 2021, but we're set up to have an above average crop.
And more numbers to show you guys. The latest crop condition ratings just released late this afternoon from USDA. The agency putting 58% of the nation's corn crop in the good to excellent category. That's down 1% from last week for Ohio. It puts it at 74% of the crop good to excellent. Meanwhile, South Dakota, 56%. As for soybeans, 59% of the overall crop rated good to excellent this week. That's about the same as a week ago. In Ohio, 72% rated good to excellent. South Dakota also at 59%. Guys, as you see those crop progress number or crop condition ratings, what are your thoughts there? Did that match up with what you saw out in the field?
Sure.
Well, my thought is that the crop conditions are probably going to be extreme heat that we're facing this week or will face this week. So I think that the numbers are somewhat old, even though they're the fresh numbers today, because next week we'll see a decline, in my opinion.
It's a great point.
Yeah, we probably will see that decline, but at the same time, I think Brian is looking at a crop that's much less mature than the crop that we looked at in South Dakota. And as we know, once we start to get towards the finish line, it's not going to look as good. South Dakota crop ratings haven't been great all season. I get that. But I would think that some deterioration in those crop condition ratings from this point forward in South Dakota would make a lot of sense seasonally.
Yeah, Chip, let's talk about South Dakota. What a difference a year makes. Obviously, last year, more than 35% of that state was in drought at the time. A year later, scouts finding much better conditions, as you've mentioned, for the crops. Scouts we traveled with didn't see a lot of pollination problems. However, there seemed to be quite a bit of variability in some fields. Rains didn't start till the end of July for a lot of folks there.
Well, we've been getting rains just in time, sparingly. I think the beans will be decent because the late rains have helped them. Corn looks good from the road, but when you get in there, it's not. Spots are maybe 14 around instead of 18, so it'll be hit and miss. Just depends where you're at. You don't have to go too far north or south, and it's a lot worse.
Now, Chip, I don't know if you saw this. One of the locations that our team went across reported a little pest pressure, some pockets of grasshoppers feeding. It was just a field there in south of Sioux Falls. Did you see any other pest pressure while you were out today?
Boy, I tell you what, it's thick when they eat it right down to the rib, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we saw grasshoppers the whole way. But I didn't hear anybody say that they stepped into a field full of spider mites. I didn't hear anybody say that they stepped into a field full of aphids. We just didn't talk about that today. But of course, we did mention the fact that there's grasshoppers out there, and doing all kinds of damage on the edge.
All right, guys, talk to me about tomorrow. What are your expectations for tomorrow? Obviously, you guys will go back to the rooms and discuss with everybody there in person a little bit more about the numbers, but let's get a preview for folks at home that are tuning in. Brian, to start with you, as you work through Indiana into Illinois, what do you expect to see?
Well, we should see stuff get better, even better. USDA has a record yield on corn for Indiana, and so we should see that number improve. As we move into Illinois, I think that's one of the question mark states. Just how much that crop is hurt. We know that the yield is bigger, projected to be bigger, or estimated to be bigger than what it is in Indiana. But still, I think there's some question marks in Illinois.
Chip, what about for you as you guys get through hot and get real serious there in Nebraska, especially there on the eastern half of the state?
Yeah. We've got one route that'll head west and south before it heads to the east, but we're going to be doing everything east of Grand Island and south of the Platte River on Tuesday, make our way over to Nebraska City. The first part, we're going to be in a lot of irrigated corn tomorrow. It's kind of my favorite, morning out on crop tour because we do get into some of the really big yields usually. And tomorrow's the day that I quite often pull the big one for the trip for myself. Unless Minnesota's got good conditions out there, we might have to wait until Minnesota to find that big buster yield this year. But lots of irrigated corn in the morning. Then once we get over to the east side, we'll get back into the hills and get into the dryland corn again and dryland soybeans and after a full day of the heat and some breeze, and we'll be there for the afternoon of the second day of heat and a breeze. It'll be interesting to see what kind of stress that bean crop is showing for sure.
Absolutely, fellas. Sure appreciate it. Of course, this is just day one of the Pro Farmer Crop Tour. Tomorrow, the Scouts, as you mentioned, travel from Indiana into Illinois. And then on the western side, they're going to focus on Nebraska. So make sure to join us right back here again tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Central. We'll bring the latest results from the tour from Nebraska and Indiana. Of course, we want to invite you and thank you for joining us today. And we'll send it back to the guys there in the studio and see you all again tomorrow night here at Pro Farmer Crop Tour Live.
The 2023 Pro Farmer Crop Tour is presented by Pioneer. Pioneer combines cutting-edge research with one of the largest local testing programs in the industry to help farmers succeed. Pioneer, what's next happens here. And by BASF, helping you do the biggest job on earth. The international sponsor for Crop Tour is the U.S. Soybean Export Council. Crop Tour 2023 is also supported by Ag Leader, by Brandt, by Champion Seed, by Farm Credit Services of America, by Growmark, by Meristem Crop Performance, by the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council, by Nutrien, by Pattern Ag, by RCIS, and by the United Soybean Board.